Hello friends, welcome back to another video. So Crystallized is officially Ninjago's last season, and knowing that the next piece of content we are getting from the Ninjago franchise will not be in any shape or form called Season 16, then it's the perfect time to make one final update to every ranking list there is. Ranking the premieres, finales, villains, villainous factions, intros, concepts, and of course, the seasons as a whole. So yeah, this is ranking the first episode of every season. This is of course my opinion. So yeah, let's start with my least favorite Ninjago premiere. Of course, it will be a miracle if Season 11 isn't the worst season in any aspect. Wasted True Potential is Wildbrain's first episode and it shows. I honestly thought that these are names and descriptions for some cheap miniseries when the episode name and description got released. You can obviously see that Ninjago became way more childish and less focused on story with this episode. Also, this was the first 11 minutes episode, which I hate so much and is in my opinion Ninjago's worst decision ever. Not to mention the new animation, which was very hard to swallow. The concept of this episode is just so boring and it feels like a complete waste of time. It's literally season 1's premiere but infinitely worse and nothing important happens. I hate how the ninja were acting and they felt like characters we never saw before. I wish that this episode featured the ninja doing something interesting or revolutionary after they basically defeated the biggest threat ever and there's nothing else to do. Not childish behavior that we already saw before, but way worse this time. This episode was just a complete waste of time and I wouldn't recommend anyone to rewatch it. Only redeeming part was probably that the fight against Wu was a bit enjoyable to watch, I guess, but even that was full of awkward moments and frustrating dialogue. Overall, very useless episode that literally does nothing right and is just so childish and insignificant. Terrible start to this new era of Ninjago. 2 out of 10. Another Wildbrain premiere. Shintaro is a below average episode. The ninja are just having fun and cleaning the monastery, then they get an invitation to a princess's birthday. Very casual and slow, no huge fights or anything, except the dire bats fight, which was a very cheap way to include action in this episode. It was a very boring and forced action scene, and there are other bad scenes like Wu becoming emo, again a very forced idea in this episode just to give Wu a whatever arc this season only because the writers completely abandoned him the last few seasons, so they wanted to remind us that Wu exists. And yeah, the rest is just whatever. Overall, this has less bad moments than Wasted True Potential, but it's more boring to be honest, so I don't think it's leagues above the last spot. Still better though, and I'll give it a 3.5 out of 10. This episode is just so boring. It's the only Masters of Spinjitzu premiere that doesn't really start the main storyline of the season and doesn't introduce the main villains. The reason is because when the Hegmans were writing this episode, they didn't even know what the toys for this season will be, so they had no idea what the villains and vehicles are. Which is also the reason why the filler episodes exist. So yeah, quick fun fact there. But that's the reason why this episode is pretty empty. I honestly think it's unacceptable or improvised by the Hegmans, but as an episode, it's just so boring. The ninja get their jobs and all. Just a very casual episode. Its problem isn't that its writing is awful or that it has many terrible moments like Wasted True Potential. The episode is very low because it's just pretty boring, kinda unnecessary to watch. Which already makes it a bad premiere because it doesn't do what a premiere needs to do. Garmadon had a couple of good scenes and that's it. So yeah, 5 out of 10 episode. Ah yes, the original Ninjago episode. Some people have read the heck out of this episode due to nostalgia, but looking back at it, it was an alright premiere. I might go easy on this premiere because it was the very first episode and the writers still aren't used to writing this world and these characters, but it has many flaws. There was literally an entire scene where Kai was talking in Cole's voice, and this drives me crazy because I don't even know how these mistakes can possibly happen. Do the editors pay no attention? I know it's not a huge deal, but I just don't understand how this even happens. There's also another writing mistake that made me extremely confused. In one of the scenes, Nia said this:
"When you hear them rattle their tails, don't look them in the eyes. That's how they get you."
But literally only one of the Hypnobrai has a tail, all of them have normal legs. So yeah, that's a pretty huge writing mistake right there. Not to mention Wu's plot convenience sweet smoke thingy. But honestly, I won't go hard on this episode as like I said, it's the very first one, so I won't focus on those mistakes too much. But this is definitely one of the weaker premieres though. I think it's just on a right start to the show. I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. This marks the beginning to the worst focus season character arc in my opinion. The seasons that have a huge solo character arc for their main character are 2, 6, 7, 8, 13 and this. But in my opinion this is the worst one because it's the only one where the character don't seem like themselves anymore. Nia was acting very rude in this episode and she was just angry all the time. Is this the same Nia who used to apologize for every mistake she makes even if it wasn't entirely her Cole's fault? Now she's screaming at everyone's face and just being a very annoying person. Not even like in Skybound, because in that season I can at least understand why she's acting like that. Here it just seems completely out of character. So this episode failed in being a good start for her character arc this season in my opinion. Then we have the retcon of water and wind not being created by the first Spinjitzu master. I honestly dislike this because these are literally the two most important elements to create a world, yet the first Spinjitzu master never used them and just separates the elements for no reason. Overall, I don't really like this premiere, but it's higher than the previous ones because it's not as boring or filled with plot holes and flat out annoying moments. I give it a 5.5 out of 10. Entering the top 10 we have Farewell the Sea. This was originally 2 spots higher, but it's now lower because this is literally the invitation but way weaker, which I don't really like. After Nia's sacrifice in Seabound, I was sure that this season premiere will be the invitation clone, so I was hoping for something creative, but they ended up doing exactly what I expected. And whenever I think of this episode, I just think it's Tournament's premiere, but worse. Like in the invitation, the scenes with the ninja were all pretty good, and the ninja were coping with Zane's loss in sensual ways, with the closer people to him being more affected. And Lloyd, who had the weakest relationship with him out of the ninja, was the only one who wasn't completely broken by it. But in Farewell the Sea is just weird. Lloyd is for some reason more affected than Kai, which makes no sense, and Jay's scene was just cringe, not to mention the new ninja, which I just hate a lot. So yeah, I wish this episode was different. The Avenged Stone mystery was good and Cole was actually very good in here, but yeah, overall this is just an okay premiere, 6 out of 10. The Darkness Comes is a lot like Darkness Shall Rise, if the names are almost identical. Yeah, I definitely didn't call this episode Darkness Shall Rise the whole time and had to rewrite the script. But yeah, anyway, the episodes are also similar in the sense that they are both very boring. But this one is better because at least it introduces the villains and has way more interesting scenes. But both have a lot of these scenes where the ninja are doing random activities you just don't care about. I like the legacy vibe in this one and the mural scene was great. The Oni invasion was amazing and a really creative introduction to the Oni. That's easily this episode's biggest strength. Even the foreshadowing to Cole's fall was pretty cool. However, there are stuff I'm not a fan of, like the backstory scene and the entire first half of this episode. Even Garmadon felt a bit off this episode. The dialogue as a whole feels different than and even weaker than the other Anu trilogy installments. Overall, this is a very average 6 out of 10 episode. And finally, we have the last Wildbrain premiere. And we are moving to actually decent ones. This is by far the best Wildbrain premiere. The action is very enjoyable to watch and doesn't feel annoyingly forced. And it's just like the mystery vibe of the arcade stuff. The mechanic returns and it was a clever writing choice to bring him back. Jay entering the arcade box was also a pretty good scene. Overall, this episode sets the mystery of the season and introduces us to its important characters while having enjoyable and non-forced action. That's how to make a successful 11 minutes premiere. This is also the only Wildbrain premiere I think is well done for the most part, and is an acceptable start to the season, but it still has its own problems, so yeah, I give it 6.5 out of 10. Infamous is a bit better than Prime Empire's premiere. I honestly think that Infamous is quite underrated. Sure, the whole ninja being famous stuff was extremely cringe and unnecessary, but the main reason why I think this is a decent premiere is the character moments. This episode generally has some of the best interactions between the ninja, like Jay and Zane talking about the reflection moment, then Cole comes and reveals his new powers to them, while you have Nia in the background doing her own thing. These are some of the best stuff about Ninjago, and it sucks so much how most of the seasons don't really have any of these interactions between the ninja. So yeah, that's a huge plus for this episode. Klaus coming back was a very cool move and Nadikan's introduction was just fantastic. What an amazing scene to set up such a menacing villain. However, this episode has its own issues as I said in the beginning. The whole famous ninja thing was just a waste of time. The scene with Nelson was cringe and Nia was horrible in this episode, but that shines in the upcoming episodes a lot more. Overall, this episode had its fair share of bad writing decisions and bad concepts, but Nadikan's amazing introduction and the great character moments make it a more or less decent episode. 6.5 out of 10. Yes, I can't believe season 7 is this high in any ranking list, but I guess everything is possible. This is also easily the best season 7 episode. Paired with the first episode of most seasons being one of its weakest, The Hands of Time was able to climb this list. But yeah, The Hands of Time is honestly the only episode of season 7 I actually don't hate. The fight scenes are very good, and although very long, it still smartly contributed into the plot of the episode, so it feels natural. Both fights were very good, but Chronix vs. Wu was just amazing. Even the museum scenes were actually decent, including Kai and Nia talking about their parents. The only bad parts of this episode were that the animation and dialogue were weak, just like how Wasted True Potential just feels such a downgrade from the previous stuff. Also feels like a downgrade, and the Crux reveal is just so odd. Overall, a really interesting episode, and this spot is the start of the actual really good premieres. 8 out of 10. The surge is just weird. It's super messy and paced horribly, yet I freaking love this episode. It's just too enjoyable that I don't even care about the pace or writing or whatever. Ninja being a teacher is just too random, but cool I guess. But then we see new Ninjago, which just looks incredible. This episode really makes us feel like we are in the future. The vibe it has is just so good. Pixel and Cyrus Borg had really good introductions, but my favorite aspect of this episode is the ninja just going crazy and hacking the vehicles and doing the most badass moves. Really good stuff. This episode really proves that you can make someone like an episode even though it has weak writing. Lost introduction was also very badass, not to mention Wu getting captured. Overall, I really like this episode and I think it was a very good comeback for Ninjago. However, I can't give it a crazy rating because it still has a messy pace and some weird decisions. 8 out of 10. This is easily the most controversial decision of this entire video, but I honestly don't care. I love the Mask of Deception. The first 8 minutes were pure joy, just like the Surge, but even better because the animation here is just crazy beautiful. Every single frame from that entire sequence is super beautiful and well done. The chase was also awesome, but then we get more casual scenes like Cole and Jay searching for Wu. And these are the scenes I'm talking about, like the one in Infamous. Then we get the palace sequence, which I absolutely admire. Hirumi introducing the ninja was super cool to watch and the entire moment was just very magical. I really don't get why people usually put this episode very low. It has fantastic action, fantastic dialogue and character interaction, and fantastic introduction to the main plot of the season. Even the ninja reuniting was an amazing scene. Only problem I can see with this episode is probably that the explanation to the royal family was a bit cheap, but that's just very minor and nitpicky. Overall, this is easily one of Ninjago's most underrated episodes in my opinion, and I feel like some people don't care for it much only because others do. But otherwise, it's definitely one of the best premieres of the show for me. 9 out of 10. What a great concept for a season premiere. And as we are already on the topic of great Ninjago interactions, boy doesn't this episode have a lot of that. I love the scenes where Lloyd talks to the ninja. I honestly think they could have been better and longer and the dialogue they have is essentially weak, but I still love the concept and vibe of these scenes. Especially the Kai one, which had the best dialogue by far. It's such an amazing concept and gives you an urge to continue watching. And that's the thing with this episode. Out of all 15, this is the best premiere in terms of hooking the viewer, which is mostly thanks to its amazing concept. The scenes in the ship are amazing and seeing new elemental masters was just the coolest thing ever. Even the fight between Kai and Karloff was super good. Overall, this is the best premiere in terms of its plot, but I think the dialogue scenes could have been way better and there are some weird action scenes that take you out of the great vibe like the Noodle House fight. I understand why those exist, but this episode could have had slightly better structure, but still a great premiere, 9 out of 10. What a hard job that was making Firstborn an actually good premiere, because unlike every other premiere, this one had to introduce 2 storylines instead of 1. But it did a great job. Not to sound redundant here, but the character moments in this episode were brilliant. Lloyd expressing how depressed he is and Nia motivating him was some of the greatest character interactions we ever had. It's a shame Lloyd found out that they are still alive in this very episode, which is pretty much my only complaint with this episode alongside Dareth. Dareth is literally the worst thing about Ninjago. I can't express enough how much I hate him. Literally almost ruined Haunted for me because he was super annoying. Like how there was a serious moment in this episode where the resistance got surrounded by the Sons of Garmadon, then Dareth starts dancing out of nowhere. That's literally the cringiest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe the Hegmans almost ruined one of their best seasons with a dumb character like Dareth. It was a lot worse in later episodes, but thank God in this episode he didn't do a lot of terrible stuff, so it takes away like 0.5 from this episode. But yeah, he was honestly the only actual problem I had with this episode. Everything else was amazing. Iron Baron's cliffhanger was so chilling. Also, this episode captured Ninjago after Garmadon corrupted it so well with how how destroyed it is, the Sons of Gardner being everywhere, and even Ultraviolet's new show, even tiny details like the color green being illegal to wear. These small details really matter and create an atmosphere for the episode. So yeah, overall this is a fantastic episode with top tier writing and dialogue. Only problem is Dareth, but he didn't really do too much in this episode. 9.5 out of 10. Finally, the best Ninjago premiere, Winds of Change. This episode is just next level, not because it has the strongest writing. In fact, I think the two Oniduology premieres are better than this in terms of writing, but this is the best because it introduces the season in the best way possible. Adikan, Chen, and Chronix all had really good introductions, but Moro has a legendary introduction. I love how everything was completely fine and going well, but in 1 second everything goes to hell. Lord gets possessed, the ninja lose their powers, and an angry weird ghost wants to destroy the world. This sudden change of circumstances was just peak tension. The fight was also amazing and easily one of the best from the show. We even had an amazing character moment with Kai and how he tried to rescue Lloyd. This episode was just so intense and had the best start of events. Unlike Darkness Comes, for example, which had a boring way to introduce the threat. Even the very first scene of this episode was crazy with the Night Watchman. Only scene I thought was alright was the ninja passing the flyers, but even that was very cool character moments. Only premiere alongside the Mask of Deception that had zero bad moments. So overall this was a perfect premiere, and that's why I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Okay, we finally finished this video. Yeah, this video took forever to make, so I'm already depressed because I'll have to go through the same torture with like 6 more videos. With all that being said, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to tell me in the comments what are your favorite premieres. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll see you next time.